Hey everyone, I'm Thanos Davelis, and I want to welcome you all to the new launch of the Greek Current Cafe, a new space that builds on our podcast, The Greek Current, where we're going to host a series of discussions with leading experts from across the world and the political spectrum on the key issues of our day. So we're excited to have you with us, and today we're kicking off with a group of one-of-a-kind experts for a special Thanksgiving-inspired turkey roast. For those of you who already follow our podcast, The Greek Current, our guests should need no introduction, but for those catching us for the first time, I think a round of intros and welcomes is in order. And joining us from Washington, D.C. and Chicago, we've got, and don't be confused by the titles that appear on screen, Stephen Cook, the Eni Enrico Mattei Senior Fellow for the Middle East and North Africa at the Council on Foreign Relations. Stephen, great to have you with us.
Hey, it's great to be back with you, Thanos. I love the new thing here, the Greek Current Cafe.
Well, hopefully there's going to be a lot more discussion. So
I want tzatziki though, we
can't set that up.
The coffee's good, but I need
You haven't had a real Fredo espresso then if you're asking for tzatziki.
Yeah, we can work out something with some mezes. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that should be number 2 on the to-do list. Next, we got Jonathan Schanzer, the Executive Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, great to have you here.
Great to be with most of you. Not all.
Moving over, we've got Michael Rubin, the Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum and a Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Michael, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. I just look at the Greek Current Cafe, imagine what the Turkey Current Cafe would be. How many of us would be Hamasniks? How many of us would be from Hudson? How many of us would, sorry. Anyway, back to you.
And last but not
least, out of the gate, this guy.
Endy Zemenides, the Executive Director of HALC, and it also looks like Michael Rubin's twin.
Yeah, and also since End of Ambition is in the screen here, I think I'm on page IXV in the acknowledgement.
You are.
You actually got to IXV? That's
well played.
Make sure everyone pick up the book so that we can find Endy's name in there, and then shoot us a message when you have it. But great to have you all on with us today, and happy Thanksgiving to all our listeners. And I think let's dive in. President Biden just did the annual Turkey pardon, but it seems like the bill of indictment against Erdogan's Turkey keeps getting longer and longer. With the latest story, I think that's leading the headlines in Washington, we're seeing these new headlines about Turkey and Hamas. Jonathan, is this Erdogan-Hamas bromance quickly blowing up in his face?
I don't know if it's blowing up in its face yet. I mean, he's been doing this for the last 15 years, where Erdogan supported the flotilla back in 2010. He had Saleh Arouri, which was one of the top leaders of Hamas, military and political leaders of Hamas. He was based in the country. A bunch of financiers have been based in the country. They've actually plotted and coordinated and financed attacks, including one attack that led to, this was the triple homicide of 3 teens in the West Bank back in 2014 that led to a full-blown war. This has been going on now for a very long time. The difference, I think, right now is that this is maybe the last bastion of Hamas. If the Qataris kick them out, if the ones in Lebanon are going to be whacked, which is what's been happening. Maybe there's a handful of them that are left in Iran, but it looks like the Turks are the last country willing to bring in the top leaders of Hamas. So now the question is, how much pressure does Erdogan get? There have been letters issued by members of Congress. You've got expressions of concern coming out of the incoming Trump administration. So the question is, can we turn the screws on Erdogan come January 20th? I think that's the big question right now that need to be answered.
Stephen, what's your take on this? With a new administration coming in, what should we expect?
Yeah, it's hard to tell with Trump, right? Do we think that the first 4 years of this first term, does that tell us anything about what's about to unfold? I'm not sure, given the fact that the guy says he, makes policy based on his gut. Let me just say, I think that this is probably the worst scenario in terms of Hamas, is for them to be leaving Qatar and heading of all places to Istanbul. The Qataris are problematic. And Jonathan and Michael have written a lot about how problematic the Qataris are. But Hamas is actively supported in ways that actively supported by the Turks in ways that the Qataris would never allow that to happen. And so I think it's if Hamas is on its last legs, it's going to get support in Turkey, and that will help it survive. And as Jonathan said, Erdogan's been at this since 2005. I think the first meeting with Khaled Mashal was in early 2006, where he flew to Ankara, met with Erdogan and actually Abdullah Gül at the AKP party headquarters, and from there flew to Tehran. So this is a long-standing relationship, and the AKP has this like weird yen for Hamas, believing that that somehow Hamas is just like the AKP, and there's like kind of no talking these guys out of it. Now, when it comes to Trump, I remember from his first administration, if you talk to his team, particularly his team at the White House, these guys would say, you make a suggestion to them about Turkey, they're like, well, President Trump really likes President Erdogan. So they had this personal relationship that made it difficult for, I think, folks at the NSC to make recommendations about how to manage Turkey. Now, all that being said, when Donald Trump wanted the release of Andrew Brunson, the pastor who had been picked up after the coup and held in jail, a guy who'd been in Izmir for 25 years, Trump, went straight to social media and said he was going to crash the Turkish economy until Erdogan coughed him up. So, there's always the possibility that Trump is going to take a tough line on Erdogan, but there is, I think, a personal relationship between the two leaders that may get in the way of that.
Michael, Stephen mentioned, and we've all about your writings on this, and we've all, read a number of your articles around the Turkey-Hamas connection and Erdogan's Islamist bent. Are we at a point now where Washington can no longer play, see no evil, hear no evil with Turkey?
First of all, I think we are. Let me just say, Turkey is a problem. It's not the only problem with Hamas. We also have Malaysia waiting in the wings. That said, the problem with Turkey and where the wedge might be drawn is that Hamas isn't the only problem. When we just had the terrorist murder of the Chabad rabbi in the United Arab Emirates, where did the fugitives flee to? Turkey. That's probably not random. There's other terrorist groups which have been involved in Turkey. The Islamic State, for example, has had, at best, logistical support in Turkey. Turkey became its designated point for R&R. And so all of this is accumulating in a way which might make it far more difficult for the Trump administration. Look, personnel is policy, and we don't quite know where the chips are going to fall when it comes to the Trump 2.0 and Turkey. What we do know is that Trump has an agenda, and he's not going to want the antics of Recep Tayyip Erdogan to distract him from that agenda. So I'm mildly hopeful that he won't allow the Turkey whisperers to sway him on this issue.
Endy, given all of these ties that we've been talking about, should Turkey be considered a part of, this axis of resistance rather than as a NATO ally?
They are. I mean, forget about considered. They are part of the axis of resistance. And as Michael said, personnel is policy. And if Turkey should be freaking out about Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz and the rest. And something that John and FTD have done a lot of work on, terrorism finance. Let's remember, during the first Trump term is when the issue of Halkbank broke out. Turkey has lost its Supreme Court case on it, just lost another appeal. I think pretty soon there's going to be a lot of attention on how Hamas is funneling terrorist financing through Turkey. So whatever President Trump's relationship is with Erdogan, there's a lot of bad stuff there that will filter through. And Congress is finally paying attention from A to Z. There were people in Congress who talked about Hamas. There's a letter out there asking for classified briefings. I think we're going to get from classified briefings to open hearings pretty quickly.
Jonathan, you've done a lot of work on the Halkbank issue at FDD. Can you expand on that for us? Where are we on that process? Is this something we need to be adding to the list of indictments that we brought up earlier?
Yeah, look, what we know is that the Turks helped Iran evade sanctions between 2000 and roughly 2005 to 2008, maybe a little longer, $20 billion worth of cash and gold that were moved through Turkey, in some cases through the UAE, and then onward to Iran. This was all happening at the height of the effort to block Iran from going nuclear, from getting the cash that it needed in order to make that dash for a bomb amidst the sanctions being imposed by the United States. Outrageous that the Turks did this. We obviously saw the arrest of Reza Zarrab, who was the key facilitator in that scheme. He was arrested idiotically. This guy flies to Florida for a Disney World vacation with his family and gets arrested by DOJ.
Actually, he went to meet you there because you're in Florida right now. He was hanging out with you.
He now raises horses in Florida.
Yeah, well, he's Witness Protection Program, or WITLESS, as the case may be. A guy who's a total idiot for coming to Florida. But at any rate, he's been flipped. And now we're looking at an effort to actually hold Halkbank, the second largest lender in Turkey, public lender. We're looking at an effort underway to hold them to account, including at a case in the Supreme Court, which will be heard soon. But let me just actually point out that even though that has ended, we continue to see efforts on the part of the Turkish government or Turkish facilitators that are still moving gold and cash in exchange for gasoline, natural gas, etc. We're hearing about, schemes out of Venezuela where they're still doing this stuff. These guys are the illicit bankers for the world's worst regimes. And I do think that President Trump or President-elect Trump is going to have to deal with this. But one last thing I just want to add here is that I got to say that the extradition of those 3 Uzbeks from Turkey back to the UAE in a matter of 3 hours strikes me as really one of the most oddest episodes we've seen in foreign policy, right? These are Uzbeks. They dumped the body of a Chabad rabbi at an airfield that is controlled by the royal family of the UAE, and then somehow get on a plane immediately thereafter to go to Istanbul. And somehow the Turkish government decides to just arrest them as soon as they get off the plane, send them back immediately to the UAE, and the case is closed. When have we ever seen such neat and clean justice served in the Middle East like this? I've never seen anything like it. I think there's a lot more that needs to be answered for. Why did they go to Turkey in the first place? Was Turkey exposed here? It was supposed to be an IRGC plot, but what is the role of Turkey in all of this other than the country that just simply turned these guys back around and sent them to face justice in the UAE? This does not fit the profile of Erdogan's Turkey that we've been watching for the last 15 years.
And this is where Trump may have an opportunity because everybody's been, quiet, letting the Halkbank thing go through the courts. Trump could just do a tweet. You won't kick out Hamas. I'm hitting Halkbank with the biggest fine in history. And I'm going to go after. He's already threatening 25% tariffs against China, Canada, and Mexico if he's willing to use, Twitter economic warfare, or I don't know if it was Truth Social. That's how he got Pastor Brunson, by the way. He said, I will destroy your economy.
Right. But there's no indications yet that the president-elect is interested at the moment in this issue. We know that members of Congress are, as you mentioned, Endy, there is a letter out there. But, this kind of crap has been going on for a long time. I mean, Erdogan's rhetoric throughout the war in Gaza has been awful. They bought an S-400 from Russia. They've been supporting Hamas for years. They've got, as Michael pointed out, ISIS in the country. They've been doing all kinds of stuff. Yet Congress, it was only the S-400 that moved Congress to do stuff. And every time folks believe that Congress is going to act, the executive branch says, hey, Turkey is of utmost strategic importance. And members of Congress tend to defer to what the executive branch has to say. So unless the president, it seems to me, unless the president-elect, once he's inaugurated, gets involved personally in this issue, there's likely to be a similar kind of dynamic. I know that Marco Rubio and Michael Waltz are different types of personalities, but we still have the same bureaucracy. We still have the same kind of commitments, and we still have the same ideas about Turkey that I think are outdated. But at each moment, there have been letters before. There's been this, idea that now Turkey's going to get whacked for doing all of these things, and they never do. And then, obviously, as Michael pointed out, there's a number of Turkey whisperers who I think are much more influential within the GOP than they are within the Democratic Party. And so, I'm a wait and see. I see a possibility here that the Turks worm out of this, even if they do, welcome Hamas and continue doing all of the malevolent things that they have been doing.
Michael, I know since Stephen brought up that you had made some comments on this, if you want to jump in, I'd love to hear your take.
I just want Michael to name names. It's not my style, but it's his.
I've matured with the years, at least over the last
not
week.
Really.
What this is my fear as an analyst, not as an advocate. While I hope that Trump has changed, and certainly the dynamics have also changed among many different groups in the Republican Party, though I do agree with what Stephen said, the number of Turkey whisperers is disproportionate among the Republicans. What I worry about is Trump in his first term relished embarrassing his staff, hanging them out to dry. And while Rubio and Waltz are very good on these issues, what I worry about is they're going to be put in a position where Trump is going to use Turkey to humiliate little Marco or a situation like that. I hope he keeps his eyes on the ball, but this is something which is always overhanging, at least until we see who the next ambassador will be. And look, with Turkey having become a political appointment, which means Yuri Kim is going to have to go over to Manila instead of.
Well, there you go. I think Endy would make a fine ambassador in Ankara.
But the key is look at what a disaster Jeffrey Flake was.
Right.
How he single-handedly tried to revive the F-35 deal. It went nowhere when, among others, HALC exposed it. But there's a danger that if we get the wrong person in Ankara, that it could exacerbate the problem rather than resolve the problem.
Which is, by the way, which is important why Jim Risch being the chairman of Senate Foreign Relations, because he was a hard line on Turkey the first 4 years of Trump. And I remember Lindsey Graham trying to do that reconciliation meeting in the White House, and Jim Risch didn't bite. So the confirmation hearing of whoever the Turkey ambassador may be is going to be fascinating.
I want to bring us back to NATO and something that was launched online by HALC, a caption contest on Twitter earlier this week, or on X. And I think we should be able to pull up the image for our audience here for everybody to see it, and for our speakers to see as well. But here you see Erdogan, holding hands with the new Secretary General Mark Rutte, and our good caption contest. But has Turkey checked out of NATO years ago? I mean, Jonathan, let's jump in with you.
Yeah, I mean, my caption was, welcome to the Hotel California, that Turkey checked out of NATO years ago, but it just won't leave. I mean, I think it's fair to say that that's exactly what's going on, whether it was the acquisition of the Russian S-400, whether it was, the threats of joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the support for Hamas, the support for ISIS, the support for Iran. These guys are a disaster, right? And hostage diplomacy, involving American citizens, the Pastor Brunson affair, all of this stuff is unbecoming of a NATO ally. And I will just say that this is the concern that I have moving forward with the Trump administration or any other. Turkey's greatest asset right now in Washington is the Pentagon. They want Incirlik. They want the stability of Turkey to be protected, right? That they don't want outside attacks or attacks from Washington against their NATO allies. They're trying to keep it all in place. They're trying to keep it all intact. And Mike Waltz, who I love, who I know personally, I mean, I've heard him talk about how the Turks were valuable contributors to the NATO forces that were deployed in the Afghanistan war, who he fought alongside. The question is whether does he still feel the same way? Where is Rubio on this? Where are some of the other names that have been mentioned here for senior national security roles? Are they willing to hear new things? I know that Mike generally is open to these things. I know Rubio is a voracious reader of all things Middle East. So I'm heartened, but I am still concerned because the Pentagon wields immense power in Washington, as we all know.
Stephen, what's your take here? I know you've written in the past that Turkey is neither friend nor foe. Where does this, with the caption contest?
Well, my caption would have been ally but not partner, which I think captures it. It's sort of similar to what Jonathan is saying. They are a NATO ally by dint of the fact that they're a member of the alliance, but they're not a partner. And I think that that's something that some members of Congress and some members of the executive branch and most outside analysts understand, but it's never translated into policy. And as far as the soon-to-be national security advisor, look, what I heard about the Turks is that they were helpful within Kabul, but never went outside of Kabul. They provided security in the city, and that was it. It wasn't like they were out in the hinterlands fighting with American forces. Besides, this is years and years and years ago. I think the Pentagon is somewhat of a problem here. EUCOM for a long time has, looks at Turkey as if it was Turkey in 1975 or 1980 or 1985, not 2025. Incirlik was very important in the fight against the Islamic State, but you have to remind people that the Turks made the United States negotiate for a year before it could use Incirlik the way in which the United States wanted to. The Turks limited U.S. Air Force to ISR against the Islamic State, forcing the Air Force and Navy to fly long distances in order to take on the Islamic State. So this is a country that, as I said, Rubin doesn't like this caption. It's an ally but not a partner, but I think it perfectly captures the thing. I'm a much more serious analyst than Rubin anyway.
Michael, you wanna respond to that?
On that note, my caption was, my pronouns are they, them. What are yours? But putting that aside,
I mean, that's perfectly on brand.
What I think, I mean, where we're going with this, and I think we actually have consensus, is that we've got to calibrate our policy towards the reality of now rather than the wishful thinking or to yesteryear. Incirlik is no longer needed in the way it once was. When I talk to Turkey officials, Turkey policymakers, and so forth in the United States, they say that the one crucial asset which Turkey has, which prevents us from simply a rupture, is the early warning radar station at Malatya. It's not Incirlik. So then if we want to double down, we need to figure out how we can get a substitute for that radar station. Now, what I always found strange about this, when people, former U.S. ambassadors to Turkey and so forth, Pentagon officials swear by it, is what? The radar station, the early warning radar station, was built what was it, 2011 or so? It's relatively recent. It's not something that's existed since the 1950s.
I remember there was a big fight about it. The Turks did not want any of the data from the radar station to go to the Israelis.
Right. Absolutely.
It was a big fight at the time.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, but the point is that's how we need to have that sort of granularity of focus. The other thing we need to recognize and stop is Turkey's double game. On one hand, they will present themselves as being an alternative, energy independence for Europe, something that releases us from the blackmail of the Russians and the Iranians. But when we actually look at the gas that's going through Turkish pipelines, especially from Azerbaijan, much of that is actually Russian gas. It's an illusion. It's a rebranding. It's a repackaging. We can't let them get away with that. So there is a lot we need to talk about. What I also worry about moving forward in the Eastern Med, and this is a little bit something different, is the Turkey-Qatar nexus, which we see elsewhere. I just came back from Cyprus, as you know, and one thing that emerged is that the Qataris have bought gas blocks from Lebanon, from Cyprus, and from Egypt, which gives them a little bit of triangle. And Qatar is the one country that doesn't need more gas. They're doing it for presence. And when we look at how Turkey interferes with regard to Cyprus and Cyprus's international waters and so forth, to have Qatar in the mix simply suggests that our adversaries, the Muslim Brotherhood axis of evil, is actually engaged in a much broader strategy. We're not playing defense. We're simply not playing.
Yeah, picking up on Cyprus, we just saw.
Wait, I don't get my caption. I mean, seriously, I actually think the caption is, Macron was right. You guys are a brain dead organization.
Oh, wow.
And especially this Secretary General who had to go and beg Turkey to be okay with him being the next Secretary General. I actually think this pretense that Turkey is a NATO ally is going to do a lot more damage to NATO than anything President-elect Trump is going to say about NATO. And Turkey has figured out NATO is a hostage. We saw him do it in Sweden. And I kind of joked around in the caption contest, said, hey, what can I shake you down for? And that's what it's going to be. It's a shakedown. But it is boomeranging. It's something that Stephen wrote in his last report, Neither Friend Nor Foe. Like, look at alternatives. Look at alternatives in Incirlik. And in fact, the bureaucracy slowly, and the Pentagon has been developing those alternatives. When Stephen wrote that report, there was no such thing as Alexandroupolis. There was no new MDCA in Greece. We see, and Michael's seen it now, and John and Stephen, actually now I think all four of us have been to Cyprus, or all five of us, that there is new investment on a security front by the U.S. and Cyprus. So it's going to boomerang, but Turkey is certainly not going to leave NATO, because then they can't hold it hostage for anything. And also, the moment they leave NATO, Greece can invoke Article 5.
What I just want to jump in for a second, Thanos.
Yeah.
Endy's perfectly right. Look, Turkey is not going to leave NATO, and at the same time, NATO has no mechanism to kick Turkey out. The discussion we need to be having within NATO circles is, how do you quarantine Turkey in that context? Look, we have Five Eyes intelligence, where we share intelligence with certain countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom. Why don't we have, and all of us have been consumers or have used in our government careers, classified documents before, and oftentimes they have specific categories that you can share with specific people, that sort of thing, specific countries. Why don't we have, in effect, an everyone but Turkey classification inside Turkey, inside NATO, so that Turkey remains in NATO? That's fine. But why don't we simply quarantine them? Now, the big problem, of course, is Turkey has de facto veto power because of NATO consensus rules. But the OSCE used to have consensus rules. And then what they developed, because they didn't want to get into the situation of a single country holding them hostage, is extraordinary situations where you could have a override. I mean, basically consensus -1. And why don't we explore that sort of procedure when it comes to NATO as well? And they were able to do it within the OSCE without fundamentally revising any sort of treaty. They were just able to do it administratively.
I know Schanzer wants to jump in here, but let me just say that I think that this is probably the smartest way to deal with Turkey in NATO, is that to kind of redistribute the things that have made Turkey important. So, we don't have to rely on Incirlik. There actually are options available to the United States if we would just be willing to think about them and have the political will to take the Turks on. We don't have to include Turkey in every meeting in NATO. We can rethink this radar issue in Malatya. I mean, I was told it was the only place it could be built given the trajectory of Iranian missiles and so on and so forth. I found that kind of hard to believe. It strikes me that was a sop to the Turks. So that there's no kicking Turkey out of NATO. I don't know how many times I have to say it. I'm blue in the face, but there are ways of diminishing Turkey within NATO so it doesn't hold hostage. I mean, the whole thing about Sweden, I mean, I could hear them laughing in the Greek foreign ministry all the way from Washington every time the Turks moved the goalposts, because they said that's exactly what was going to happen.
Jonathan, what's your take on all this?
Yeah, look, I just want to maybe add a couple quick things. I mean, one thing when we talk about Incirlik or some of the military assets that we have in Turkey, I think we need to be looking right now at ways that Congress can force maybe just even an assessment, right? Contingency plans about how to get out of Turkey if need be. By the way, how to get out of Qatar if need be. These are two countries that act like enemies, even though they're part of the American alliance. And I think Congress does have a role to play. But I want to introduce.
I just want to advocate for Qatar Airways business class. It's really, really nice.
Yeah, they're collecting on you even as you sleep. I'm just saying.
I know. I got a burner phone.
Yeah, you're going to need more than that. But at any rate, the one thing I just want to note here is that I think there is a very interesting possibility looming. You have all these Hamas guys moving to Turkey, and you've got an Israeli Mossad that is very eager to neutralize these dirtbags who've been waging war against them for the last 14 months. I think it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to see things go boom. There's going to be blood on the carpet, right? Whether it's in Doha or it's in Istanbul, accidents are going to start to happen with some of these people. The question is, how does Turkey deal with this? I mean, I doubt the Israelis are just going to stand down and allow these guys to live in Istanbul in peace, right? So what happens when you start to see friction here? How do the Turks react? How does the U.S. react? Do we see efforts by the U.S. to try to prevent that kind of thing from happening by demanding the extradition of these Hamas guys? I mean, just to bring it back full circle, I could imagine that the Turks might try to invoke Article 5 if there's an attack inside their own country, even if it's a targeted assassination. How is the Trump administration going to navigate that? That, I think, is going to be very interesting and just a bit awkward, too.
I'd like to wrap up with a really quick, round robin for everybody. Any flashpoints that you think we should be looking out for when it comes to Turkey? I think let's kick off with Endy and move over to Stephen, Jonathan, and wrap up with Michael.
Look, the Hamas one, as everybody knows, the East Med and a lot of the East Med advocacy came by a lot of different constituencies working together. And Turkey's going to bring all these constituencies back together. I think the pro-Israel community has, with Lebanon maybe off the table, as soon as something stops at Gaza, they're going to be able to extract their pound of flesh from Turkey for what it's done, not only with Hamas, but everything since October 7th. And I would bet that Hamas officials in Turkey had something to do with October 7th. So you can look at that. Obviously, Greek Americans, a Cyprus issue, Armenia with Artsakh, and something that Michael talked about, another thing about personnel being policy, the advocacy in favor of Christians internationally is going to come back. it got sidelined the last 4 years compared to what it was during the first Trump administration, and especially under Marco Rubio. And that is not good news for Turkey either.
Stephen?
My flashpoint is Turkey.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the panoply of issues here that are before us, and I think that all of this is going to come to the surface in some way, shape, or form. And I think the big question mark here is, what will the president-elect do? And does this garner his attention? Because if it does garner his attention, and he is miffed, annoyed by the Turks, then you can expect a Congress that is controlled by the Republicans to act, but otherwise not, and that could mute the Turkey whisperers. But I'm somewhat skeptical. I mean, I think yes, the pro-Israel community. How come they haven't exacted a pound of flesh already? So I think there are a lot of obstacles to this because of the way in which Turkey is viewed in official Washington by others as this. I think it was Condoleezza Rice. I mean, it was a long time ago, but Condoleezza Rice referred to Turkey as a strategic ally of utmost importance. I think that that's the frame through which many people actually look at Turkey.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm watching Halkbank. I got to say, that's the thing that's going to absolutely just create a meltdown with Erdogan. And it doesn't really matter who's president, right? This is a Justice Department issue. You're going to have a major case that plays out if the Turks are ultimately held to account for this massive sanctions evasion scheme, and it leads to the tanking of their economy to some extent or another. I can imagine Erdogan being very tempted to engage in some of the antics that we've seen before. Look, I think that Trump, just the person of Trump, has Erdogan somewhat chastened. I think he's afraid of trifling with this guy. He knows that that Trump has put sanctions on his inner circle in the past. He's played hardball with them, and so he may be afraid to tackle or to tangle with Trump. But at the same time, if he feels that his country's national interests are being trampled by our justice system, I can only imagine the storm that could be coming.
And the floor is yours with the last word.
Sure. There's a pattern with Turkey where there will be an escalation of crisis and an expectation of reward for resolving that crisis. And so we see the crises rotate from Greece to Cyprus to Armenia to Iraq to Syria to Israel and to Libya and so forth. That's not what concerns me. What concerns me is that Turkey is becoming to the 21st century what Saudi Arabia was to the late 20th century with regard to becoming an engine for radicalization. So what I worry about is not the careful plot that Erdogan lays out, but rather the reverberations of Turkey's general embrace of radicalization. Could we have another 9/11 type episode, but this time instead of Saudi pilots, it will be Turks in some capacity? And then how will that play out in terms of Turkey being a NATO ally and so forth? I worry increasingly that you can't have the sort of radicalization you have in Turkey and not ultimately expect the wildfire to burn out of control. So on that happy note.
Let's wrap up.
For all of those who deep fried turkey on Thanksgiving.
Endy, Stephen, Jonathan, Michael, great chatting. Thanks for joining us for this turkey roast. And to all our listeners, stay tuned for our next videos. And before we wrap up, Endy, I think many people have got the question, what are you watching behind you? What movie's playing?
I'm not watching it, but I'm waiting for the scene. It's American Gangster, because there's the greatest scene involving a turkey in movies was when Denzel Washington sent Josh Brolin a turkey for Thanksgiving. So
I think we've got
then blew up his car. So I think that's
I think we've got the clip on deck, and we'll play it for our audience as we sign off. So thanks again.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks.
pretty awesome.